Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. Just as a quick aside, quite a few listeners have contacted me, viewers, and said, why don't you get a talking avatar rather than have a blank screen? I'm just putting it out there. Just give me some feedback if you wouldn't mind, and I may go down that path. This is meant to be a radio broadcast while you're driving your truck or your car. You listen to, but if a talking avatar would help, then let me know. The purpose of this essay, then, the subject of this essay is the Great Society. So, just a real quick history lesson. In the 1960s, this idea of civil rights, equality, and so on were becoming big talking points from a couple of angles. Firstly, there were a large number of Soviet agitators that were running around the West, infiltrating trade unions, infiltrating academia, and so on. And they were using the equity, the early version of the equity. And we'll look at the outcomes in society; they're not the same. And in order to have a fair society, like communism, which is what they were pushing, in order to have a fair society, everybody must have an equal outcome. And if you don't have that, then you have oppression, you have exploitation, you have all the evil stuff of the evil capitalist fat pig, and this sort of stuff. And so this sort of attitude was coming in and again infiltrating not the trade unions, academia, but also black activist groups were being infiltrated by, again, these communist agitators and filling their minds full of, well, look, your outcome, the cropper farmer in Tennessee or out in the middle of out in the sticks, he's not getting the same life outcome as the merchant banker in downtown New York. So there you go. That's proof that the oppression is. So simplistic arguments like that, which are very, very communist and very much part of that era, they've been transposed today from more class issues into, well, that black lesbian doesn't get the same outcome as and so on. So it's still the same message, just transposed across into race and sexuality and things like that. Now, the Great Society was also part of the wider Cold War ideological struggle. The communists were, and at the time we're talking about, say, Nikita Khrushchev, the communists were running around the Soviet Union, were claiming that, well, we're getting much better outcomes in the Soviet Union than you guys are getting. We've got more equality. We've got a higher standard of living. We don't have poor people living on the street. We don't have people without jobs. We don't have people starving to death. And so on and so forth. Now, this was a bit rich coming from a country that was still imprisoning millions of people for wrong things. So, but nonetheless, that was the claim being made, and the rebuilding after World War II had given the Soviet Union a sort of an artificial productivity boost, and people were being what hitherto had been rural peasants living on a farm were being moved to the cities and given very, very basic communal type apartments still, where you could have 4 families sharing one toilet and bath and this sort of thing. Nonetheless, the attitude of the Kennedy administration in the early 60s, and following that, the administration after Kennedy was assassinated of Lyndon Johnson, they went down this path of the civil rights and trying to eradicate poverty was their big thing. They're going to eradicate poverty, and so they conceived this, and there were close to 100 separate pieces of legislation were passed just on this, and it was called by Johnson and his political handlers and spin doctors, it was called the Great Society. They were going to achieve a great society. And again, there were 2 reasons. One was to damp down the civil rights thing that looked like it might get ugly. and also to show that America was the leader in the world. Now, at the same time that the Soviets were pulling ahead or what appeared to be pulling ahead, they were the first to put a man in space. Yuri Gagarin was the first guy to go into space in a Soviet-made spaceship, and this shook up the Americans a lot of people, but the Americans, thinking, how could these guys be ahead of us? And so the view was the nation with the most technical prowess, sending a guy to the moon or outer space, would have then therefore the most advanced weaponry, and that was a signal to all others, don't mess with us. We're the super high tech dudes. You mess with us and you're in serious trouble. That type of thing. And so the image of America as the world leader in technology, but also in creating a fair and just society, became important to American lawmakers and the president's administration. So this is the Great Society, was born of a combination of these things. Now, the propaganda at the time was rampant. For example, why do black people not have equal outcomes with white people? And they did the same trick back in the day that they do now. They portrayed black people as extremely urbane, immaculately presented, very well dressed, very well spoken, and other than sort of the Southern preacher thing that Martin Luther King did. But so they presented, why do blacks have to be at the back of the bus? And they go to a shot of an immaculately dressed and presented black guy. Now, were they showing the inner city hoods and gangs? Were they showing the illiterate, toothless peasant farmer in the sharecropper type farmer in the middle of out in the sticks in Alabama or something? No, they weren't. They were picking the most, and I assume some of them, given how good they look, they must have been like male models or something. But so they picked those guys to say, well, look, these people aren't being treated fairly. You can see the problem. So the propaganda was around then. That's not the average black. In fact, the amount of black people that will be that superbly well dressed, well spoken, well presented would be 1 in 1,000. But they present the most unusual case and present that as, well, that's how all black people are, when it's clearly not the case. So, but it came back to the issue really of, if we're going to eradicate poverty, we have to address the causes of poverty. What are these causes? And it's approached from a very ideological perspective. Well, education, and the people of the left love this education thing. They actually gag and have wet dreams over it. And Democrats, if you've noticed, of all flavors around the world, be it they, left-wing parties, they all talk about, I'm the education prime minister, I'm the education president, and they don't even know what the fuck that means. What they mean is, well, let's shower everybody in PhDs, job done, everyone's educated, rather than looking at there's a long-term heavy lifting project to do this. It's got to change attitudes and views. There has to be heavy compulsion used. There has to be all sorts of things that are done. And back in the day, there were black-only schools that weren't performing well. And the reason for that wasn't that the kids weren't trying hard, but after 1 or 2 years of school, they'd goof off. Absenteeism was insane, and the place was out of, they didn't look at it the white schools are better resourced, so why don't we just put the black kids in the white schools? Bang, that's it, problem solved. And all it did was lower the standard, and then the black kids still weren't doing as well. Well, let's just lower the grades. Let's just give black kids grades and wave them through into senior high school and college. And so all these, the long-term effect of it was, if you focus on how can we get the outcome we want, then you have to then rearrange whatever it is that it takes to do that without doing the heavy lifting. Inevitably, they're drawn like a moth to the flame to the idea of just the cosmetics, the window dressing of the outcome. So if you want to get black kids to you've got to have enforcement officers go around to their house and say, no, you're coming to school, buddy. And then you have to have punishments for misbehavior in school. and then you have to, so now you flunked your test, you got to work harder. And so there has to be methods of brutality, even what today we would call brutality, used to make sure the black kid concentrates and works hard and hits the books and so on. Just when I was a kid, and it's not like I'm a million years old, but I went to a private sort of equivalent of it. I suppose you could call it like a private cramming school for kindergarten kids. When I say kindergarten, 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, that sort of age range. And the teachers there used to say, no kid in my class is going to fail. If I've got to beat the shit out of you, they didn't use those words, by the way. But if I have to use severe discipline, you're going to do it. And the view they took was, if you're not passing your exams or doing well, then it just means you're not concentrating. That's all it is. You're not applying yourself. If you concentrate and apply yourself, you will do well. So even that was a form of equity in its way. So they would just make you try harder. If that meant inflicting pain and punishment, they would do it. But the idea was that you would discover the full extent of your true potential in academic sort of sense, and they would force you to succeed, even if it meant beating you up to do it. Now, ultimately, they said, well, this will be in your best interest, because you'll become a good student, a hardworking, diligent student that applies yourself, and you'll learn more, you'll be more capable, then you'll be a better member of society. So that the beatings that you get now will be to your benefit over the long run. And you can kind of see the logic of that. But if you're going to treat minority groups that way, then there's going to be screams of white supremacy and Nazi and fascist and Hitler. You can imagine all that. So they had to try and achieve equal outcomes without doing any of the heavy lifting needed, which really is it's a 20, 30, 40-year project, that any of the heavy lifting needed to do that. If you go to a black single mother and say, we're going to fine you $20 a week if your kid doesn't go to school, or $100, it doesn't matter. We're going to somehow punish you if your kid doesn't go to school. What are you going to actually take from these people? I mean, they've got nothing anyway. What are you going to take from them? And they can just go and get another government program to make up for the fine that that sort of thing. And then they'll just take it out on the children. The children will just eat no food. The children, they'll just go hungry. They won't change their behaviour to solve the problem. And this was something that the Great Society never considered. Now, if you go to a middle class, white family and say, look, your kid hasn't been going to school, we're going to fine you $100 a week. It's a completely different. But they'll think, oh, I can't make the mortgage payment. Oh no, I can't make the payments on the car if that happens. I don't need this aggravation. They can't have the kids going without their nutritious meals, blah, 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 blah. So I will change my behaviour in order to so I don't get these fines. But that only happens to a certain type of people. There are other people, the ones that they're trying to help, it has no effect. So very quickly in the Great Society, they found that there are very substantial limits as to what they can do. Sure, they talk about character and have a dream, and they talk about all that sort of stuff, and it sounds good. The optics are good, and it sounds very altruistic and so on. But the reality of the heavy lifting is something quite different. Sure, you can talk about that. How do you make it happen? The real details, the heavy lifting of making that happen. And suddenly it's a different ballgame. Next thing you know, you're forcing black kids, you would need to force black kids into what they would call concentration camp. We have another case of Nazis today. And you can just imagine the headlines that would have occurred. So they really couldn't do much when it came down to it. The difference is why there were different outcomes. Not just for blacks, by the way, but in other cases. For example, there were some coal mines in the Appalachians that closed down. They're effectively mined out, but they were quite big in their day. And the people that lived in the area, they owned their own houses, and some of them aren't salubrious mansions or anything, but they own their own houses, and they tend to have fairly big families around there. And so the mines closed down, and where do these people don't leave? They own their own house. They probably acquired the house on free land at the time, if they move somewhere else, they got to buy a new house, or they got to pay rent, or they got, it's a totally different. They're moving away from all their relatives, and so they don't move. They stay in the area, and they become quite impoverished. Now, what do you do with people like that? You say, hey, we're just going to move you to another town. If you don't want to go, we'll point guns at you till you do what we tell you to do. How do you actually solve things like that? When the people that want to stay in an area that's been their lives and lives of their parents and grandparents, but where there are no more jobs, the mines have closed down. So do you move them by force, by threat? They're already on welfare. What can you do to them? Do you make life so miserable for them that they have to go somewhere? That probably wouldn't work so well. So it happens to anybody in those circumstances, be they black or anyone else. So the Great Society with these grand visions of we're going to eradicate poverty, we're going to educate kids so that the kids are all highly educated, and we're going to fix their health. It was kind of, if you look at the Peace Corps that was set up in the Kennedy years, it was really the same thing, just for the domestic agenda in the United States. And we're going to have access to good quality health, and we're going to develop agriculture. Again, that's probably more third world, but make sure that people have a good quality diet. So, which relates back to the health anyway. Now, again, this is tough. If people like high fat, high sugar diets, for example, how do you stop them from doing it? What do you threaten them with? How do you carrot stick people like that? They need a certain amount of sophistication to even understand why you're trying to get it. But why shouldn't I enjoy doing it. Now, I've hired black people over the years, and this black guy I'm thinking of, and he had allegedly two college degrees from the United States, and he's a New York guy, reasonably well spoken. He didn't talk with that black street jive talk, the Southern preacher talk or anything like that. And so he spoke reasonably well, and he was could be well presented if he wanted to be. Did a lot of time in the gym, so he's a fit guy. Wouldn't say he watched what he ate. He still ate pretty bad food, but he had a lot of very self-destructive habits, like he smoked too much dope. They were living, him and his wife, were living well beyond their means, far beyond their means, and eating out every night and they weren't eating out the local takeout food shop or something. They're eating out at restaurants and borrowing money from loan sharks to buy dope and all sorts of things like that. Plus, he's always getting into trouble, was getting into fights, and always imagining that people were disrespecting him, whether they were or not, and so on. And try as I might, I couldn't get him to change his behavior. But his attitude was all the time, but it makes me feel good to smoke dope. Why would I stop doing it if it makes me feel good? But it makes me feel good to spend money and go out for dinner. I feel good. It makes me feel good. Why would I stop doing something that makes me feel good? And so on. And his view was that people that exercised self-restraint or stopped doing things that made them feel good because they needed to get their finances under control or something else, he viewed that as white boy behavior. White people did that. Stupid white people. White people deny things that make them feel good because of making the monthly budget balance or something. He viewed that as just stupidity and ridiculous. That's just crazy white people doing that sort of shit. So it became so, and this was the same with the white society, the Great Society. The idea that you can just change people's behavior because it's the most sensible, reasonable, obviously so thing to do doesn't mean they're going to see it that way, and they didn't. And instead, the plight and condition of black people actually went backwards. All the things were made, putting black kids in white schools, spending more money on black kids in black areas, all this sort of stuff. Nothing really worked, and the situation with black homelessness, single motherhood, women having 26-year-old women having 5 children by 5 different men, this sort of thing, all that sort of stuff got significantly worse from the Great Society. So the Great Society, you'd have to say, on balance, in spite of its monumental expenditures, was a huge failure. Unless people want to go to school and see the benefit of it, they're not going to go. You can put them in the best equipped school in the whole universe, but if they don't give a shit, then that's not going to be a benefit, and they're going to steal anything isn't nailed down anyway. So it's overall, it will change nothing. All it will do will increase their sense of entitlement. If in turn you say, well, don't worry about academic achievement or scholastic ability or whether you pass exams, we're just going to put you through into senior high school or university anyway, then that creates a sense of entitlement. Well, I don't have to work. Why should I work? That they have to give me that PhD, and if they don't, I'll call them a racist Nazi, and then they'll give it to me anyway. This sort of thing. And so it created attitudes of dependency and sloth and entitlement, and created even a wider us and them, so that even so a lot of black people, even ones you'd say wouldn't really think this way, that if you behave like a white guy, then you're some Uncle Tom, as in you go to school and you try and do well at school, you want to get a good job, then you're an Uncle Tom, which means like you're a sellout to the black community. So now that may be more the inner city slum type attitudes, but it's also outside of that. And so the Great Society created attitudes and problems that, if any, made things worse. Now you can throw a lot of welfare checks at people, which means that they're not on the street, or they're technically at least not going hungry, or you give them food stamps, and these sort of things did alleviate, but they tended to cushion the effect of personal bad behavior rather than change behavior or change anything or create a new society. Did it have some effect? Well, the poverty rate declined. They changed how poverty was measured, by the way, but the poverty rate declined because they're giving out more food stamps. But did the poverty rate did the behavior that led to poverty actually decline or change? Well, it didn't. That stayed the same. If anything, got worse. It's just that the government was now heavily subsidizing bad behavior that led to poverty, and had the effect of cushioning some of it. It's difficult to look back on these things and see just how grand the visions were. Now, I could have told them for free back in the day. I'm sure there were plenty of people that were saying it too, that this is not going to work. But it's politicians wanting to be seen to be doing something. I'm doing something about the problem, and seen to be, rather than solving the problem. And those are two completely different things. And the Great Society was a huge effort to be seen to be doing something, whilst ultimately solving nothing. And in the final analysis over the longer term, actually creating more problems than there were in the beginning. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.